computer. Got to make sure it's recording so I don't lose the rest of it. Yep, good. That's going. Right, so if I go to support.apple.com, it's about to see because that you are screen sharing, go away. If I move that down a bit, yeah, I know that. Get out of the way, please. And in here, I search for download old macOS version. How to get old versions of macOS, there we go. So what they've done now is they've got a new page which lists all of the old versions in one place, or at least all the old versions they've got available. So what this page does, it tells you about minimum system requirements, and there it has links to all individual pages. And you can see this goes back as far as Yosemite, which is 10.10. They haven't got the older versions available for download, so it's only as far back as that. And they also have compatibility lists for each model on each family. General advice, make a backup, which as per my instructions, always do a backup before you upgrade the operating system. And here they provide you with links to download macOS versions. And you'll notice there's two groupings here. The latest 3 versions, Catalina, Mojave, and High Sierra, are all available via the App Store. So what happens if you click on one of those links is it actually takes you to the App Store and shows you a page for that operating system, which you cannot find if you search for it in the App Store. You have to use the link to get straight to it, and then that will let you download the installer for the older operating system that you need. And if I click the Get button now, I'd be sitting here for half an hour while we waited for a 5 GB plus download, so I won't do that. But what that does is it downloads the install macOS High Sierra in this case. If I go back to that Safari page again and go back one, so that's how it works for High Sierra, Mojave, or Catalina. For the older ones, Apple changed the distribution method. Rather than using the App Store, if you click on one of those links, it goes and downloads a 5-ish gigabyte disk image file. And when you get that disk image, you open the disk image. Inside the disk image is a installer package. You open the installer package, it goes and installs a copy of the installer for the operating system you want. So it's like a download, open, run package, which creates the installer, then you run the installer. So it's like how many steps do we have to jump through to get this thing? It also means you need twice as much disk space because it's a 5 gig download and a 5 gig application, roughly. So it's doubly messy. Once you've got that, you then got a working installer. There is a catch. You can only do any of these if your Mac is able to run the version in question. So for example, I have beside me a 2009 16-inch MacBook Pro, which can only download Catalina because that's what it came with. It can't download any of the older versions. However, my 2013 MacBook Pro is able to run all those versions, so it can download the whole lot. A 2011 MacBook Pro would only be able to download as far as High Sierra because it can't run Mojave or Catalina. So you've got to be aware of what your computer can do. If you do need a specific version, the easiest option is to download it on the computer you want to install it on. But if you can't do that, you might need access to another computer of the right age range, just so you can do that. Once you've got it, what you end up with is an installer that looks like, here's some I prepared earlier. That will do. I'll just run the Mojave one as an example. Yep, all right, I downloaded that myself. I won't actually go through it, but I'll just show you what it starts out looking like. If you get it from the App Store, it runs automatically. It's actually still loading, it's having a think about it. There it is. All of them start up with the screen that looks like that. Just changes the detail of which OS version it is in the picture, and it's got a continue button at the bottom. Nothing else will happen at this point. It will just sit there and wait forever for you to click that continue button. If you do not want to install it immediately, you can go up to the menu bar and choose the quick command, or just press Command Q. And then that will leave the installer sitting in your applications folder for later use. If you do go and click the continue button, don't panic, because the next thing it does is it asks you to agree to the license agreement. And you're still going to get through that, agree to it. And now, if I click the install button, I would be in trouble because I've now been installing an operating system. So basically, you've got a 3-stage process before it gets to the dangerous point. So I can still quit at that point, and it's not running anymore.
So it's got a half-life.
Yes, I'll just run Catalina just so you can see the difference. So they all look pretty much the same. So I won't be able to run the older versions. You can't install an older version on top of your current version. So you can't downgrade, for example, from Mojave to High Sierra. You have to do that. You may not even be allowed to run the installer because it could only install to an external drive. So there's Catalina one, just a different name and picture, same pattern, agree, agree. And here I can go show all disks. And if I had any other disks connected, it would pop up there. I could pick a different drive and install it on an external drive rather than the internal one. So that's reasonable.
So when does it start from Catalina?
No, that installer pattern starts from Lion back in 2011. Every single one of them looks the same. I probably can't run Sierra or High Sierra because they aren't compatible with this operating system.
So
yeah.
Yeah,
I'd have to, in order to install, if I wanted to now install an older version on an external drive, I'd have to have a Mac running an older version to do that. So that makes it a bit more complicated. I have many Macs. This is just a small selection. So I have the options. So if anybody needs help with that, sing out and I can give you a hand if there's a particular version you need to read for some reason. Also worth noting, if you happen to have virtual machines, it's from VMware, I've actually got every version from 10.5 up to 10.14 running in a virtual machine if I need it anyway, so I can run all the old versions for demo purposes or something like that, or to run particular applications in a hurry. So there are ways of doing it, but it's just a bit complicated. Now, as for Big Sur, or whatever is the current version, if you want that, you simply go into App Store and search for it by name, and here it is slightly below here, macOS Big Sur. If I click on that, I won't click on the Get button because that's a 12 gigabyte download in that case, so I won't try and do that now. Luckily, I prepared that one earlier on a different computer. So yeah, so the current version is always available through App Store, and it doesn't actually download it anymore using App Store. It goes and switches to System Preferences and downloads it there if you're running, I think, Mojave or later. So it's a bit confusing. Also, if you are running Mojave or later, then there is a persistent advertisement sitting in the System Preferences software update telling you about the new version that's ready and waiting for you. So I have to just keep ignoring that. Wait for it, wait for it.
It's a little trickier when there's other updates.
Yes, it does. So I'll just point that out. So it always shows the new version there with an Upgrade Now button. If there are other updates available, then in this area just underneath the slightly different shade of grey, there is another bit of text saying there are other updates available with another More Info button. You click on that More Info button and it shows you a list of them, and then you can go and install them manually. Yes.
Which top operating system is it?
That's one I haven't got here, but I could run a virtual machine just to see. I'll set that up. Oh, no, actually, that won't work because all of these will run it. If they are too old to even show it, because I think if you're running about Mavericks or later, it probably wouldn't show up, but it's all different anyway. I don't actually have any old enough Macs with me tonight to demonstrate that. I know from past experience that when older Mac models were not able to run the latest version, App Store still had the whopping great huge upgrade banner, and then when you tried to go and do it, it said, no, you can't. So it just insisted on advertising it to you even if you couldn't run it. So irritating as anything. Yeah, okay. If I hop back into Zoom for now. So stop sharing. Okay, so I think that more or less covered your question, didn't it, Margaret? It was basically, where do I go to get Mojave, and how do I not have it install on me automatically? You'll need to unmute your microphone if you want to say anything.
Sorry, it was off to the left. Yes, I did find that other website, but it's good to know the Apple one.
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing was gone out of my head. Sorry.
There was a secondary question, but I think I covered all of them in the email to you anyway, wasn't there? But it was
You did,
there was a second page which you found, which was to do with creating a bootable installer, which is what the article actually pointed you at. I don't want to go into that level of detail. People need to know that there is another support article on Apple's website, which has a horrible incantation you can type in on the command line in Terminal to create a bootable installer from the installer application using a USB flash drive, and that can be used to install on a Mac that, for example, hasn't got an internet connection. That sort of thing.
It did sound as if all these things that you download to your applications or whatever are bootable by definition. So
not directly. They won't boot as such, but they've got the capability of creating a bootable installer from the application, basically.
Well, if you go through the installation process, it will install.
Well, like if I went and ran install macOS Mojave or whatever, that would end up creating a bootable disk. That's what you mean, yes, because that's the end product. So it will either install it on a blank hard drive, which will then be bootable into that operating system, or install the operating system onto a drive which has no operating system, or upgrade it to that version. So whichever you wanted to do, it does all three of those things. As well as
you need an active computer to convert the installer into the
yes.
And it will do it as long as you've got the equipment to do it with, which you may not have. If you want to make sure you're further along the road, you
just to give you an idea, I'll just show you the create install media command here.
Yeah, I think I've got the different.
I can remember the location I've got them. It's under OS 10 install. So I've got a space at the beginning. Right, let's find the location where I've stuck my installers. There we are. So if I go into install macOS Mojave, right, so then go into contents, resources. This is explained in the Apple support article. And then if you do a directory listing there, you'll find that there is something called create install media. So I can go that, which will then tell me what you have to do if I've forgotten how to use it. But the Apple's got a web page, which I can just show you quickly. So you basically got to type in this horribly long, messy here's one. Here it is. I loaded this one previously, so it's called How to Create a Bootable Installer for macOS. Again, it's an Apple support article. And to give you an idea of the difficulty, the ones for I think High Sierra and later are reasonably straightforward. You've got to type in this horrible incantation, sudo, and it's very, very case sensitive and punctuation sensitive and everything. And all these assume you haven't renamed it or moved it or anything like that. So if you just downloaded it, you can use this correctly. Otherwise, you've got to modify it. And you've got to also have a already set up drive you're going to install it onto, which you know the name of, which you use instead of my volume. So you've got to name it. So you've got to understand enough about the command line for it to make sense. And it's quite a long command. If it's an older version, it gets even worse because there's a volume and an application path you've got to specify. So you've got to type in the whole thing twice effectively. So copy and paste from this web page is a good idea because that takes care of most of the difficulty. And you then just got to make sense of some bits of it. So yeah, I've done this. And again, it's the sort of thing that's probably easier for me to give you a hand with rather than trying to do it yourself because it's horrible. But
I think I can manage. If I can put up with Mojave, I think I'll be all right to take a flying leap because Graham's just done it to go to Big Sur. I don't need to go to Catalina at all. So that can be.
So just to emphasise the point also for those who are listening, creating a bootable installer is not necessary unless you have an unusual situation. Normally, you don't bother with that. It's like I've done it for disks that I want to have handy when I'm visiting somebody to install a new operating system. I don't want to waste half an hour in downloading it again, that sort of thing. Or somebody has a slow internet connection or that sort of thing. Or I want to install it on 4 computers and I've got it handy. So anything like that. Actually, my internet's so fast now I don't even bother doing that at home. I just download another copy. Yep. Okay.
And also for the others, David had suggested to me I might want to get an old Mac on Trade Me too. So that I could make sure nothing happened to my mail while I, in the meantime, upgraded to Big Sur.
Yeah, that was
a good enough.
Recurring problem, of course. We don't know what the story is yet with Mail, whether Apple's going to fix that in a hurry or not, but they've taken a year and not fixed it. So yes, it's getting ridiculous. Okay, so if I can move along, Dennis, you had a comment you just were sharing more than a question, didn't you? Where was it? It's a bit tricky to read because it was wider than the screen. If I open that, easy to read. Just wanted to point out that ViewScan, which is a reasonably popular third-party scanner controlling application, have published an article about their ViewScan software and whether they're more or less ready for Big Sur. I don't think they've quite released it yet, but it's very close if they haven't. And they're explaining the Big Sur and the universal version, which will run on the M1 Max, is basically ready or will be soon. So, but they're sort of just tying up a few loose ends and it will be available soon. That's the sort of pattern we're seeing with quite a lot of software that I've been keeping an eye on for the last few weeks. So something won't work and then an update appears suddenly and it works again. So just that's, as it's only been 2 weeks since the operating system came out, there's quite a few things that haven't caught up yet.
Will it work backwards, David, or should I keep 2 versions?
What was that, sorry?
Like I'm a fan of ViewScan. If I do the most recent upgrade, but I haven't got Big Sur, will it still work with my hardware?
Okay, that varies considerably. For example, I've got Little Snitch, which is a sort of an application firewall. It blocks outgoing connections or alerts you if an application is trying to do something you didn't expect on the internet. They've released a new version which requires a major upgrade which you pay for, which only works on Big Sur. So I can't install that version on any older Macs, only on Macs running Big Sur. So you have to be aware of that for each individual application. Most of the ones that I've got updates for, they still support recent OS versions as well, so you don't need to worry about it. So on some occasions, the changes were so major that they had no choice but to basically start again. And they can, in that case, it required a completely different method of interfacing with the operating system. So in more complicated cases, it will require a totally new application, which only cost me, I think, €25 to upgrade to that one. And another one I got called Bartender, which adds, and it sorts out icons on my menu bar for me. That cost $9 to upgrade, so it wasn't expensive. But that again was one that required Big Sur because of a total change in the way that it interfaced with the operating system. Tends to be utilities, which fit into that category. Major applications just keep working on some older operating system versions. But for example, for Microsoft Office have a policy that they only support the current version, the previous version, and the one before that. So if you're running Office 365 and you get the latest update, if you're running a slightly out-of-date operating system like High Sierra, you cannot download the latest version of Microsoft Office anymore. It can only let you have an older version. You can't run the latest version because it now requires Mojave or later. So they're shifting the window each time a new version comes out. That sort of thing can happen as well. So it really depends what you're running now, and every single application's got different rules. So you have to know what's going on for every single application, unfortunately.
And you have to know whether they automatically replace the one you've got or whether they sit alongside. Yeah,
that has been a problem, I think, on a rare number of occasions. Some things actually said there's an update available. In fact, is it still doing it? Apple's doing that as well, very annoyingly. Let me just share the screen from this computer. If I go into my updates page on App Store, and I have a fair number of updates I need to install, which I haven't got around to on this computer. This is a Mac running Catalina. If I go into GarageBand, the GarageBand listing says it wants to update, but it says it requires macOS 11 or later. If I try and update GarageBand on Catalina, it says it can't. But despite that, App Store on Catalina is permanently advertising the availability of GarageBand, unless I delete GarageBand. Another one like that is Apple Remote Desktop, which has been updated for compatibility with Big Sur, and again, in the same stupid combination. This appears to be a bug in the way that Apple is advertising that app on the App Store, in effect. So the app itself does require the new operating system, but they should have excluded the previous operating system from notifications about it. So it's just a silly mistake that they haven't fixed for now 3 weeks and counting. So that's, yeah, so that one's an irritation, which I'm seeing from time to time. But other ones, usually if the app can be updated, it will keep working. I can't even think of an example, but I have run into cases in the past where something offered an update, allowed me to install it, and then told me it wouldn't work. So I then had to manually delete it and reinstall the old version and then make sure I never updated it again. That sort of basically is a stupid mistake by the developer. They got their system requirements wrong or something like that, and allowed it to run on a machine that it shouldn't have run on. So that's just a bug. And so you complain to the developer, and then they should say, "Oh, sorry, here's a link to the old version again." Hopefully. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Graham's got one.
Video that I made a comment on there about the fact that some years ago Apple changed to a RISC processor in the PowerPC.
Yes.
And then it's decided to go to Intel, which is actually a CISC processor.
Which is not real that important anymore, but yes.
Now they've gone to Apple Silicon, which is back to a RISC processor.
Yes.
And there's some big changes took place going on to PowerPCs, and it sort of killed the whole heap of apps and they had
other way around. I can explain that when we get to it. Yeah, I'll get to that because that's an important point with Apple Silicon. So I'll come back to that point later. It's easier. Okay. Any last questions? Otherwise, I will move on to talking about new style in more detail. First of all, I have in my hot little hand a M1 MacBook Air. So it happens to be rose gold. It looks exactly the same as the early 2020 MacBook Air. The only thing that's changed is you can see the top row of the keys, the I can remember which one it is now, F4. F4, F5, and F6 have got different symbols on them. That's how you can tell them apart. So F4 has got a spotlight search icon. F5's got a microphone which represents dictation, and F6 has got a do not disturb symbol like a little moon. The previous models had launchpad, a grid of buttons, and keyboard backlight controls. So apart from that, it's visibly indistinguishable. I imagine that there is actually no fan vent on the back because this model hasn't got a fan. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, there is actually a visible fan vent on the older MacBook Airs. Try that power on here. Let's go away. Hopefully that didn't disconnect that at the time. No, it's all right. Good. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the only other slightly visible detail is it may not have, doesn't appear to have any kind of vent on the back for the fan. So it's just got basically the hinge down the bottom. But it's got the usual 2 USB-C Thunderbolt ports on that side and the usual 1 headphone socket on that side. And it's the same, you can see the body shape is the same tapered design as the previous one. So, and the weight is identical, the dimensions are identical. So basically Apple, what they've done is they have replaced the innards without changing the external appearance in any way, shape or form. So the theory is, there's 2 theories I've seen about this. One of them is that they don't want to scare people, so this looks the same, so people are happy with it. And if they're not worried about what exactly is inside, they'll buy it, and it's the same computer, and they'll be happy to just go off and buy it, and it will work fine, and they won't be aware of it, what's happening under the hood. The second theory is that because this is a whole new thing, all of the people like me who are enthusiasts are rushing out and buying a new computer, not caring about the fact that it looks different, and then they can come out with a new design next time round. And then everybody think, oh, bother, now I want the new design, and go out and buy it again. That's the cynical view. So yes, that is quite possible. If you would like a newer design of computer, some of the models will probably change in appearance, but I think that's more likely to happen for the ones that are longer in tooth, as it were. So the MacBook Air already got a visual redesign in 2018 when it went to Retina display, and it hasn't changed much since then. So that's only 2 years or so since the last major change. The MacBook Pro, the 16-inch model, just came out last year, so that's probably not going to get a visible change for a while. But the iMac has not changed visibly since 2012. So that's long overdue for a major design change. And Apple's tending to do things like shrinking the bezels around the edge of the screen to make the screen bigger in the same body size, that sort of thing. So there have been rumors floating around about a 24-inch iMac, for example, replacing the 21-inch model without the screen being much physically larger, that sort of thing. So we'll probably see that coming out sometime next year. We don't know when yet. The other one that's likely to change is the Mac Mini. Dig it out of its box. I didn't get time to do that earlier. Here I have, that's the, you can see from the color, that's the space gray one. That's the 2018 Mac Mini. And if the connectors on the back are visible, you can see it's got a whole row of Thunderbolt ports above the heat vent. Here is the Apple Silicon Mac Mini, which has changed color back to silver. And that has, if I can get it the light right, only 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports above there. It's hard to see. There, that's better. Got it now. 2 of them rather than 4 of them. So they've shrunk. Basically what they've done, this one here is effectively the high-end but Intel model, and this is the low-end but Apple Silicon model. So the low-end model has been replaced. This one's actually still available. You can still buy the Intel one if you want more capability. So if you need more ports, you need more memory, you need more external displays or whatever, you can still buy the Intel one, but it costs more. Or if you just want the fastest possible Mac Mini, you buy the entry-level one, which is a hell of a lot better computer, apart from the fact it hasn't got as many ports and connectors. Sorry? Which is the fastest? The new one, by a substantial margin. If you're doing anything graphics related, the M1 Mac Mini is at least 6 times faster than the Intel one, because the integrated graphics is really bad in the Mac Mini, but it's really good in the M1. So that makes a huge difference. So the only disadvantage really is what you can plug in externally. So basically I bought 2 new Macs with a new processor. I didn't bother buying the MacBook Pro. I don't have any need for that one. Got plenty already. But the MacBook Air is actually going to eventually be my partner's. So we bought it in anticipation that she'll get it in about 6 months when I finish playing with it. In the meantime, I'll keep the Mac Mini as my sort of test machine. But price-wise, also, the Mac Mini's dropped considerably. That was like 200, I have to find a number. Got a spreadsheet. Let's find it again. Mac Mini went down by $250 for the entry-level model, and $450 for the more expensive configuration. And that's retained the same storage capacity as well. So that was quite a substantial drop in price. Sorry? 11. So the Mac Mini is now $11.99, the cheapest one. So when I bought it, the cheapest one was $14.49, and I went for a much more expensive one with extra memory and things, so that cost even more. So yep, and the MacBook Air and Pro, they went down by sort of $50 to $150 depending on model. So they're only a little bit cheaper, but the Mac Minis were down quite a lot. Because effectively what you're doing is you're sacrificing features, because currently the only Apple Silicon processor available is an entry-level one that has limited input-output capability. So it has only got 2 Thunderbolt ports, for example. So if you are looking at an old MacBook Air or an old 13-inch MacBook Pro with 2 Thunderbolt ports, the replacements are complete supersets of them, with the possible exception of how many external displays you can plug in. I think you might have been able to get away with more than 2 on certain models, but with the new ones, you can only have 1 external display plus the built-in one. However, the Mac Mini is definitely a downgrade in terms of what you can plug into it at the moment, but it's a lot faster. So it swings and roundabouts, basically. So my watch bleeping at me. Okay, so so far, I've only had it for a week. Arrived last Sunday, literally on Sunday. The Mac Mini arrived on Monday. A courier delivery from China on arriving on a Sunday, which was a big surprise. And then the Monday for the Mac Mini, that one came from Australia. So it got faster than I thought. Right, sorry, Garnet, I didn't actually see your question at the time. It was just about was that Graham's question you couldn't hear?
That's the one.
Yeah,
but like, if there's any long question, I'd appreciate help with it, because they're not audible.
Yeah, I can hopefully try swapping microphones. We've got an external microphone, but it might not work too well. So we'll see how we go. Okay. Yep. So I've had it for a week, both of them. I've only used the Mac Mini a little bit so far. I've been concentrating on the MacBook Air. So I did some tests mostly on last Friday. I took it around to a friend's place and we threw some things at it to see what it could do. And I've done the benchmarks that everybody else has been doing. I can say that the storage on this thing is definitely as fast as my 16-inch MacBook Pro. So they've bumped the storage speed up to match the high-end laptops. Previous MacBook Airs and entry-level MacBook Pros were half that speed. So they've doubled the storage speed. The memory, I'm not even sure how much faster it is. Some people have measured it as 60 gigabytes per second memory transfer speeds, and I don't know what the other number is prior to that. So it's ridiculously fast. The processor is a lot faster. Like Apple's been quoting numbers in the order of two times or better, faster than the corresponding Intel models. The net result is basically these things fly. The simplest example I could come up with, because I don't tend to do all that much, which is heavy duty, is I've installed a copy of Xcode and went around to a friend's place who did some software development, and we grabbed his software development project, stuck it on my Mac Mini, on my MacBook Air, sorry, and built it. And it took his computer more than a minute to do the whole process of constructing the application. It took this one less than 30 seconds. And that was comparing a entry-level MacBook Air to a high-end 2016 MacBook Pro. So
one of the things in that video, which is along the same lines, was because they're basically saying that an iPhone chip is now on a desktop computer. That's the whole thing, the ARM chip.
Yep.
It's gone to a desktop computer. And so they took, I think it was Final Cut Pro, and they downloaded the video into it. And they started off and kept it running. And it was taking quite a while. And the guy picked up an iPhone 12, loaded up iMovie, and took the same video and put it, and he held it side by side and superposed this bag across. And he started with
Hang on.
MacBook Pro first.
Speaker.
Then he started running the iPhone 12, and the iPhone 12 progress bar said, and it hit the finish while the other one was still chugging through it.
Yeah, okay. Now, nobody else will be able to hear that question. Unfortunately, the comment. Yeah, so basically, Graham was commenting on, as part of that video he's provided a link to, that, yeah, it was Final Cut Project, wasn't it?
Well, it was a video project.
A video project, yeah. So
Final Cut Pro on Power in the MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
On iMovie on an iPhone 12.
Yeah.
Which has got a processor not quite as fast as the M1. It's still an ARM processor.
sorry,
the whole
on an
comment
iPhone,
I'm
yeah.
making on that video was the fact that they're taking an iPhone, a portable processor, banging into a desktop computer.
Yep, okay. So the point there was that they're basically taking an iPhone processor and banging it into a desktop computer, which is not actually correct. What they're doing is they're taking something which is based on the internal architecture of an iPhone processor and adding a lot more stuff to it and making it more suitable for use on a Mac. Yeah. So, but that's effectively what they're doing. So they're starting with, it's roughly what they're putting in the M1 Max is roughly the equivalent of a later generation of what they have in an iPad Pro. Is a reasonable way of looking at it. Because if you looked at the most recent iPad Pros, they've got an A12Z processor, which has a quad-core high performance cores and quad-core efficiency cores plus 8 graphics cores. It's basically that specification, except that it's 2 generations newer, so it's even faster. Plus it's got other stuff.
The comments they made, they said the latest Intel processor, the fastest one we've got, draws about 250 watts. And the fastest in M1 was A12, draws 5 watts. It's faster.
Yeah. Okay. So Graham's point there was about power consumption, which I haven't got to yet. We have background noise. We had an unexpected another group meeting outside in the next room, which wasn't supposed to be there. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So basically, battery life. I just point that out. So as I've mentioned in my article, the these new M1 Macs, they start out, if you looked at the previous generation MacBook Air, it got 11 hours battery life roughly when it was brand new. It's the last Intel model. If you were basically sitting there without power plugged in and you were browsing the web effectively for the whole time on Wi-Fi, you get about 11 hours out of it. The M1 MacBook Airs do everything that machine does considerably faster and does it for 15 hours rather than 11 hours. So it's a noticeable improvement. If you looked at the MacBook Pro, it's gone up from 10 hours, so it's actually worse than the MacBook Air, to 17 hours, so it's better than the MacBook Air now. So basically, because they've got more space for battery inside the MacBook Pro, it's got a bigger advantage because the processor is using so little power compared to the old ones. So if you're comparing, like I was, this Xcode example I used for the MacBook Air, I'm comparing a computer that runs off an 85 watt power adapter, the MacBook Air, which runs off a 30 watt power adapter if it needed it, and I was running on battery at the time as well, so that might have slowed it down a bit. It was considerably faster. So if you imagine the power consumption and heat savings and everything like that, it's going to make a big difference in energy consumption, that level of detail as well.
Awesome.
Yep. So that's the power consumption. For the Mac Mini, the power doesn't really matter as it's powered off the main, so it doesn't have battery to deal with. But the other difference basically between the three models that we've got now, we've got the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini. The MacBook Air has no fan, so it's totally silent unless the computer is actually generating audio on purpose. So if you are doing something like anything which makes it work hard, it doesn't have fans spinning up or making loud hissing noises in the background at you. So for doing things like Zoom calls, computers sometimes get quite warm and have their fans spinning up. So you've got background noise in annoying situations. The MacBook Air is actually quite a good choice now because it's totally silent. If anybody had experienced the 12-inch MacBook that Apple sold from 2015 to 2017 plus however long they kept selling it after that, it's basically like that, except it's a bit bigger. So, and it's got one more port, so it's better than that model. The MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini have got fans. So, however, the commentary I've been hearing online is it's extremely hard to actually make it turn the fan on. One of the reviewers thought he had a faulty computer because he, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hear the fan. He just couldn't get it to go on. He had to really, really, really push it hard to actually make the fan come on. And effectively what you get is the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro are in effect the same computer. The only real difference is the external shape and the touch bar on the MacBook Pro rather than the MacBook Air, the slight difference in battery life, and the fan. And the fan only matters if you're doing stuff which basically makes the computer work as hard as it can for probably in the order of 10 minutes or longer. So if you're doing little bursts of stuff, it doesn't make the slightest difference. If you're doing video encoding that takes half an hour, it does make a difference. That sort of thing. So it's a question of, if you're picking a computer, there's not a lot of difference in weight. There's a bit of a difference in shape. The MacBook Pro's sort of a rectangular blob on the bottom, whereas the MacBook Air is tapered towards the front. MacBook Air is also about $500 cheaper. So some commenters are basically saying that the MacBook Air is the best Mac ever. And I tend to agree with them. For most people, it's one of the best possible computers. Now, as a test of the graphics, the other thing I did last Friday was I have a group of friends that we normally get together online and play a computer game called StarCraft. Have been doing this for decades, ever since the game came out, basically. And this time I happened to visit the friend, so one of the friends said we could do some stuff. And I played StarCraft on the MacBook Air. It got less hot than my 16-inch MacBook Pro and was able to run at the same graphics quality. And it had no fan. So my 16-inch MacBook Pro sits there with its fans going loudly while I'm playing the game, getting quite hot, and it's playing the game quite happily. The MacBook Air is playing the same game just as well, going on for half an hour longer, and it's getting warm, but not uncomfortably so.
What about adding to the MacBook Air a large monitor?
You can do that. So basically any of the M1 Mac models, so the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, or the MacBook Pro, you can plug in an external display using some USB-C to whatever you need adapter. So you can plug in for example, a display port or an HDMI monitor just by getting the right adapter, or some new monitors have actually got a USB-C socket straight on the monitor, so you plug directly into the computer. Some of them even power the computer via that cable. So there are several options in that realm. The only limitation is you can only plug in one external monitor. So if you had, for example, a setup which had two monitors side by side, you couldn't currently use that with a M1 Mac. Now, that's one reason why I'm not ready to switch yet, because when I'm running a Zoom meeting at home in my home office, I've got 3 monitors. I can't do that with an M1 Mac. I've got the built-in one plus 2 external ones. Or here I've got one plus the projector. But sometimes I need to plug in a 3rd monitor, so I couldn't do that yet. So the idea is basically the next round of models, which would replace the higher end 13-inch MacBook Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and probably the iMacs, will have a more capable processor, and hopefully will reduce some of the limitations, so that we'll have the ability to plug in more Thunderbolt ports, more monitors, that sort of thing.
David, going back to the heat factor.
Hang on a second, we've got overlapping questions here. Just pause for a second, Garnet. Graham, what was that?
One of the comments, one of the demos they showed in the video is they showed a game played on a high spec MacBook Pro.
Yep.
And when they tried zooming in, it stuck.
Yeah.
It showed exactly the same thing on the video. And it didn't stuck.
Okay. So Graham's comment there was again from the video. There was a game showing a game running on a MacBook Pro, and they zoomed in, the video stuttered, but it didn't on the MacBook, the new Mac Mini, MacBook Air probably. That, without knowing the specifics, I don't know what would be causing that, but most likely explanation is if it was a 13-inch MacBook Pro but using integrated graphics, which is pretty bad. Yeah. If it's a 16-inch MacBook Pro, it's got a dedicated graphics processor and it's pretty powerful. The Mac Mini doesn't actually, sorry, the new MacBook Air doesn't beat the MacBook Pro for graphics performance yet, the high-end 16-inch MacBook Pro, but it gets pretty close. So the next model will be better. Now, Garnet, you were about to ask a question?
Thanks. I was just going to say, going back to the temperature problem without the heater, without the fan, if it does get too hot, would there be any sort of warning or indication?
No, basically all it does is it slows down to keep it at a reasonable temperature. So the effect you get is if it's working for short bursts, it's fine. It doesn't actually get hot enough to be a problem. If it's running sustained heavy workloads, it just slows down and the workload will take longer. So the example of doing video encoding, if you're doing a job which will take half an hour of video encoding on a 13-inch MacBook Pro or a Mac Mini, it would take half an hour. The MacBook Air might take 40 minutes, but it won't get hot enough to cause any danger or anything like that. It's just effectively reducing the performance of the processor to compensate for the fact that it can't get rid of the heat fast enough. So it just slows down enough to make it still able to keep up with it and do the job. It just does it slower. So that's
I was just being
automatically.
Thanks. I was just being pedantic because in 5 years I've never had. I think there's been 2 occasions when my MacBook Air has ever used the fan at all. It's like
no. Well, for most home users, if you're not running anything intensive, you wouldn't even notice it. So but it's even cooler and quieter than it was before in effect. So I think the power rating of these chips is 10 watts or lower. It doesn't actually get to that point unless it's working hard. The MacBook Airs prior to that were 15 watts or more, so it's probably sucking 2/3 to half the power of the previous one. So the battery will last longer. It'll use less power overall. It's cooler. It's quieter in extreme circumstances. So it's overall a better computer. Okay. So any other general comments on those or questions? The other part I really want to cover was Big Sur. Now, just covering the M1 Mac part of that, so that's Apple Silicon in general, it's important to clarify there's basically two distinct classes of scenarios for running macOS Big Sur. You've got Intel models which can upgrade to Big Sur, and you've got Apple Silicon models which come with Big Sur and can't run anything older. And what exactly they can run is different. The M1 models cannot run certain classes of high-end software, the main example being virtual machines. So if you have the need to run something like Microsoft Windows, Intel versions of Linux, old versions of macOS prior to Catalina, so my virtual machine setup, for example, None of that will work on an M1 Mac because you can't run Intel operating systems on an M1 Mac at all. However, you can run Intel applications that run natively on the Mac operating system. So, for example, old versions of nearly every application I've got would probably work fine on a Mac that's been upgraded to Big Sur, an existing Intel, an Apple Silicon Mac is what I meant to say. Yes, that also run fine on an Apple Silicon Mac. That example I gave you of StarCraft, that is an Intel game running quite happily on an Apple Silicon Mac. And the other point is that in order to do that, what Apple's got is this translation engine called Rosetta, or Rosetta 2 if you like. And we've had this before. What happened when the PowerPC converted to Intel back in 2006? So the prior Mac models had a PowerPC processor, and the newer ones had an Intel processor. Apple provided Rosetta at the time, and Rosetta allowed you to run existing PowerPC applications on a new Intel Mac. And it did that by effectively looking at the instructions that the program was using and converting them on the fly to corresponding Intel instructions and then running the Intel instructions. And it did that at a reasonable speed. It was a little bit slow, but it didn't really notice it except in extreme circumstances. As Intel Macs got faster, it didn't matter anymore. They were way faster than the PowerPC models by then, so the performance disadvantage was clear, was gone away. There were a few things that didn't work for. Again, it was like you couldn't run a virtualization system. Like, for example, you may recall the classic environment that you could run macOS 9 and earlier on PowerPC Macs. That didn't work on Intel Macs because that required virtualizing the entire computer, not just translating a few instructions. Apple didn't try and do that. So Rosetta lasted in the original implementation through Tiger, Leopard, and Snow Leopard. So Apple covered it for roughly 5 years from the introduction of the Intel Macs. And then in 2011, macOS 9 came out, Rosetta went away, and from that point onwards, if your Mac was up to date, you couldn't run PowerPC applications anymore. You could only run Intel. Period. They had universal applications, basically have runs natively on Intel or on, in this case, Apple Silicon, but in the previous case, it was PowerPC and Intel, so same sort of concept. And if the application had been set up that way, then people with existing Macs could run the application, people with new Macs could run the application, and everybody got to run it as fast as possible. If the application wasn't updated and it was still PowerPC, then people with existing Macs could run it, people with new Macs could usually run it fine, except it will be slightly slower. So again, we've got the same pattern here.
Just a little comment on that. It seems strange to me, and interesting to me, that back in those early days when they had PowerPC, Motorola joined up with IBM, wasn't it? Reduced the PowerPC.
You're going back to 1994 now, Graham. Yep, okay. Yep.
Apple got peeved off that they weren't developing it fast enough.
Yeah.
So they decided to go to Intel.
Yeah.
Now they're peeved off with Intel, not really fast
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, same thing's happening again. So Graham's point there was just about the history of why did Apple go from PowerPC to Intel, which was basically PowerPC processors were working okay in high-end Macs like Power Macs, but they didn't quite get developed as fast as Apple wanted. But there was no chance at all that Apple was going to be able to get a PowerPC processor that was going to compete with, get the power consumption down low enough and be usable on a laptop. The PowerPC laptops were sort of stalled for about 3 or 4 years. And we're seeing that again now. The Intel laptops have done very little in terms of actual performance upgrades since around about 2015. Intel's come out with a new generation of processors, and then they got stuck. They kept releasing new processors that were tweaks and tweaks and tweaks and tweaks and tweaks of the previous one, rather than, oh my God, this is much faster. Sort of, which is what we had seen for about the 5 years prior to that. So starting from 2006, you got a doubling in performance every 3 years or so, and then it sort of stopped and it got a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster and so forth. So the same thing's happened again here. Intel have got stalled, Apple got sick of it and decided we've actually caught up now, we'll switch to our own processors. So yeah.
Just made a comment that Intel wouldn't produce a chip for iPhones. And I reckon it was the biggest mistake that Intel made.
Yes, Intel thinks that's the biggest mistake that Intel made. There was a comment from one of their CEO back then. They realised afterwards what a mistake it was. Yeah, when the iPhone was being developed, Apple approached Intel and asked them if they could make a suitable processor for running in an iPhone. Intel decided that this wasn't worth it. It wasn't going to be a big enough market for them to matter. Intel went as far as selling off their ARM processor development division completely. Look at where ARM processors are being used now. Every single Android phone, every single iPhone, every single Mac going forward from now on, and lots of other things as well. So Intel made a big mistake, and there is a distinct possibility that Intel will rapidly dwindle to being insignificant now because they're just not in the right market anymore. Their only remaining market really is high-end servers, and AMD is competing very hard with them in that area, and personal computers that are running Windows or Linux, which is pretty much a static and shrinking market now. There's not a lot of major development going on there. So yeah, interesting.
Supercomputer in Japan.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the fastest in the world, maybe the fastest, running the ARM processors.
All right, yeah. Graham was just commenting about a supercomputer in Japan that's one of the fastest in the world, and it's running on ARM processors, not Intel. So yes, this is how these times have changed. Okay, I got a bit sidetracked there. So if we get back to, I was talking about universal apps, and I was talking about running Intel apps on Apple Silicon Macs indirectly. So in effect, how this works is for typical end user productivity applications. So if you've got an application, just to take an example, not slightly out-of-date version of Microsoft Office, for example, Microsoft Office has not yet released a native Apple Silicon version. They have only got a Intel version. So right now, if you run Microsoft Office on a Apple Silicon Mac, you're actually running the Intel version of the software, but they have got an Apple Silicon version coming out soon. For all intents and purposes, it doesn't actually matter. What you get is the performance of running an Intel application on an Apple Silicon Mac is roughly the same as running it on the previous Intel Mac. Once they get to the Apple Silicon version, it nearly doubles in performance. So effectively, the application gets a lot faster and snappier and can do background calculations and things much faster once they come out with a native version. But in the meantime, the old versions still run perfectly acceptably. In some cases, they run faster on Apple Silicon Mac than they do on the Intel Mac, especially if they're using graphics and you're talking about low-end laptops, which have got terrible graphics on the Intel models, and they're much better graphics on the Apple Silicon models. So it's quite a fascinating sort of division there. Okay. Yeah, so basically you don't have to worry about it. The area where you tend to run into problems with compatibility is more to do with utilities and things which hook into the operating system in funny ways. Apple, and this is not just with Apple Silicon, Big Sur is continuing the trend of breaking certain old ways that applications could hook themselves in and do special things. And examples are like that little snitch software I mentioned earlier. It no longer is allowed to have a kernel extension which hooks in right at the very bottom level of the operating system. That could develop a whole new method of doing the same thing. So that means they had to replace the whole software. Things like disk cloning utilities, Carbon Copy Cloner and SuperDuper, they've changed enough stuff on the file system in Big Sur that those applications also need to have substantial changes to support creating a bootable clone of your Mac. And Carbon Copy Cloner's just got to the point where they've managed to hack together a solution. SuperDuper is not there yet. This is partly Apple's fault because Apple broke an important component of the operating system in Big Sur and they haven't fixed it yet in the publicly released version. So hopefully that will be fixed soon. So this is the sort of reason I'm suggesting rushing into Big Sur is probably a little bit risky because some things won't work properly yet. I've been running it on a test computer. I'm certainly not upgrading my main computer for quite a while yet. The Apple Silicon in terms of Big Sur versus older operating systems only goes a slight distance further in terms of what things won't work. There's certain categories of things that cannot work on Apple Silicon, they will work on Intel running Big Sur, but only if you jump through hoops. It's that sort of level of distinction. And again, it's weird stuff. It's not Pages, Numbers, Keynote, whatever, web browsers, those sorts of things which most people run. Those are all fine. Incidentally, Chrome has already updated to a native Apple Silicon version, but the other variants of Chrome, things like Chromium, Brave, Edge, and other ones like that haven't yet caught up. I think Firefox hasn't yet caught up, but it's coming in the next update. So we're not far off having as fast as possible web browsers, no matter which one you use. So that's all good.
Talking about web browsers, I've only been using Big Sur for a week now. The only thing that I've discovered, apart from the fact that it's got other issues with it, like you already mentioned, is Safari keeps running out of memory. It keeps on reloading web pages because it's running out of memory.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at Activity Monitor, they're still in the green as far as the computer is concerned. Sometimes it goes on the yellow with the web page, starts loading all sorts of stuff, and you see it actually loading on the web page of the Activity Monitor, and then it just sort of crashes that web page and just reload it.
Yeah, I've noticed particularly on my, have I got it running? No, I'm just on Activity Monitor. On my main Mac, which is running Mojave, I look at memory, Safari, well, they've actually improved it. Wow, something's got better because I had Safari using 6 gigabytes or so of memory for no obvious reason.
It actually tends to indicate all the different pages you've got loaded up.
Mm.
In different tabs.
Oh yes, it has done it. You're right. Sorry, I can see that.
And you look at those, and you see them growing really quickly.
Yeah. Well, the more tabs you've got open, the worse it's going to be. So that's been a general problem for a while, and I know people who've.
Well, I cut down the number of tabs, and I still have the same problem.
Yeah. Well, it depends mostly on the web page you're running, probably. I haven't done a comprehensive test yet of that sort of behaviour in Big Sur, but
it's growing the system memory because the system memory is fine. It's still.
No, but Safari, what's probably happening is Safari is actually swapping things out to disk a lot, and it's causing it to slow down as a result. So the system may have changed the way in which it allocates memory to applications, and that's having a side effect.
Going back to the point where you had to allocate each individual application a certain amount of memory. No,
it's just the system is being more aggressive about limiting how much each application is actually allowed to use, and it's going to push them out to disk if it has to, and then they have to reload them. But again, it depends on what you're actually running. I can't, without seeing the details, I can't be sure because I don't see that behaviour.
Watching videos.
Yeah, if you're watching videos, depends on the video format and a few other things as well. So it's hard to tell. But yeah.
These videos are open now long.
Okay. What I was going to do now is just show you. Have I got which one? MacBook Air. Find the right application again. Zoom. I need to find my MacBook Air and make it a co-host. Fast to start video. And then still won't let me be a co-host. Why not? Join audio. Make sure it's muted. Will it now let me? Nope. Okay, I can't make it the co-host, which means I can't. Oh, that's because this isn't the host. I'm the host. I have to remember who's who. I've got too many computers. So if I go to this one, there it is. There it is. Yep, make co-host. Right. Okay. Now I'll switch computers. I'm over here now. Now the people here can't see you. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen on this computer. No, it's got to allow it. This might be a problem. And it will probably need me to, yes, quit and run the meeting again. Rejoin the meeting. I've got to find the meeting details again. Passcode. Not sure if that's the right one, but we'll find out in a moment. Right. It's now running. I'll just go without audio, so it'll just confuse things. And now I've got to make it a co-host again. And now I can share the screen. Button there. That's better. Right. Okay, so now we're looking at the MacBook Air, which hopefully that's sufficiently visible to make out details, which is running macOS Big Sur. So if I just close down some of these things here just to hide backgrounds a bit. And I've got, yeah, I don't need that anymore. Let's just close that again. Okay, system preferences running. Okay, so apart from the, as it looks all right for everybody else, that's good. I've got extra stuff on my screen. The default coloured background is this quite weird, colourful thing. The major changes, in fact, it's not even visible here. Interesting. One thing I've noticed on this computer, which is different to the other one I've seen it on, is that the desktop, the title bar isn't actually being transparent, the menu bar on the top of the screen, which it usually is. Can everybody hear me, by the way? I'm having to sort of talk remotely through a different microphone. I might just try and fit in with that.
I can hear you fine, thank you.
Yep, okay. I'll just leave that there so everybody can see. So hopefully you can hear me well enough. The menu bar is usually transparent. I think because we're on a Zoom call, it's not actually doing that. It's sort of made it look white, but normally it's actually quite evident that it's transparent, translucent. You can sort of see the background color through it. Now, if I open up a new window,
There's a setting for that.
yeah, there was an accessibility thing. I haven't fiddled with it though, so and I noticed this machine's doing it as well. So there's no obvious.
Well, I adjusted my one. It's got a variable setting.
Oh yeah, no, okay. I suspect that might be a limitation of this particular computer. I'm running it on the 2015 MacBook Air. It may not be capable of doing it because the graphics isn't good enough. That may be what's going on. All right, because the M1 MacBook Air is still showing a transparent menu bar, so I think it's just a question of which model you've got. All right, okay. So just to give you an idea of what sort of visual changes we've got in Big Sur, here is the Finder window. So you'll notice the title is off center. It's no longer in the middle of the menu bar. The little icon that normally appears there to show you the sort of represents the folder, it only appears if you point to it, so it's hiding it and showing it. As long as you know it's there, that's not a problem, but if it's something you tend to use reasonably often, it can be a bit annoying because you have to go and wait for it to show up. Do people know what that icon's used for, by the way? If you pick it up, you can drag it around and it represents the entire folder or thing you're looking at. So you can actually use that to move the folder somewhere, or to, you can control click on it and it gives you the list of where you are in relation to the top of the computer. And other things you can do with them as well. It's called the proxy icon for the folder or document. Most documents have got them as well. The obvious thing they've done is they've merged the title bar and the toolbar into one element. So you've got, along here, these items would normally appear in a second row underneath the title. So they're all to the right of the title now. The other thing is that the traffic lights are not quite right at the top of the window anymore. They're a little bit down. And as I discovered when I ran Pages, this is probably an old version of Pages still, so I haven't done any updates on this computer yet. It's actually running. Yes, it's taking its time.
Pages usually does.
Yeah, this machine is not as fast as it could be. So I'm deliberately running this on an older Intel Mac just as an example. Don't need that open anymore. Just open a new window. So that's the old version of Pages. Wait for it. Yeah, just go blank. It's thinking about it. Now this machine is slightly slowed down by the fact I'm actually running it from an external solid state drive rather than the internal drive, because there's not enough space on the drive on this computer to do all my normal, this is basically a copy of my other MacBook Pro on it. So this is actually an older application. So you'll notice this one still has a toolbar and so forth. So it hasn't been updated yet to the Big Sur compatible version. So if I went and ran App Store, I'd find that there'll be a whole bunch of updates available. And while we're waiting, I'll go and load the Pages update just so you can see what's changed. So I go continue. I'll look at something else that's lying, but we'll find out in a moment. I hope.
So if you have a different, if you have the same user ID, Apple ID, look what's on your computer or what's on your Apple ID to work out what updates you need.
On the computer. I don't know why it's not saying in the updates. It hasn't worked out what needs to be updated here. I might need to restart the computer or something to do that, unfortunately. What I could possibly do, it will go have to jump through hoops again, is to do it on the other one. That's working out something up there now. No backups on this computer, but that's where I wasn't expecting to be. Okay, all right, that's going to stymie me because I can't actually install the update. I have seen it running on the M1 MacBook Air, and it looks quite different. They've changed the appearance of the toolbar to be more like the Big Sur version. So if I go back to Finder as a useful example, so the other obvious difference is that the sidebar now extends all the way up to the top. So rather than being being along the top for the title bar with the sidebar hanging off it, the sidebar is now a banner on the left-hand side of the entire window, and then the bits hang off to the right of it, which is more like, sort of resembles how the iPad does sidebars and other applications as well. So I don't know, it'll take a bit of getting used to, but I don't, apart from minor changes, it appears that it won't take much to get comfortable with the redesign, I think.
The biggest problem I have trying to find the listing icon uses it now when you move to the side.
Yep, so there's the icon view, list view, and so forth, and column view. I think look at column view
If
here.
you squash your window down the middle, so it's like narrow, start losing things.
Right.
Like the search bar for starters goes.
Now, before I worry about that, now this has actually got my entire set of applications on here from my 15-inch MacBook Pro. So it's got an awful lot of stuff on here, and I haven't even run most of them, so I don't even know which ones are working and which ones don't. But just wanted to show you the visual change to the icons by looking down at the dock at the bottom. So I just get rid of that for a moment, concentrate on the dock. So you'll notice that most of the standard icons, Finder, Siri, Launchpad, Mission Control, they've changed shape. They're no longer round, they're now a rounded rectangle, which for those who've seen the iPhone or iPad will look very familiar. Basically, Apple's taken the icon design pattern they use on the iPhone and iPad and have applied it to the Mac. So all the standard icons now resemble iPhone and iPad icons. However, they have got some aspects which are still Mac specific or sort of reminiscent of older Mac application icons. I'm just trying to see if I can spot one. Those ones don't really show it. It's all out. Half the stuff is out of date, which doesn't help.
Pages
It's the wrong icon. It's the old icon. So the new one looks different. If I go into the application folder, I'm just seeing if I can spot one. There's one. Text edit. If I bring up text edit, let's view that in preview mode. No, that's not what I wanted. There's the text edit application icon zoomed large. So you see it's got a round rec text document with a pen which straddles outside the rectangle, which is similar to how the old icon looked. So they basically retained some elements of the old icons and they've just changed the appearance to more match the iPhone and iPad. But that's just a visual change. It doesn't really affect any functionality or anything like that. The system preferences doesn't look particularly different. One significant difference though is this new feature up in the menu bar. There is a new thing called the the control center, which anybody who's got an iPhone and iPad will be familiar with this already. Is the thing you can swipe up from the bottom or swipe down from the top, which gives you quick access to a whole bunch of controls. So rather than having to have a long string of icons like I currently have in my menu bar, you can access most of those things from one icon. So it gives you easy access to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, AirDrop, Do Not Disturb, keyboard brightness, screen mirroring, display brightness, sound, and whatever application is currently playing music. And I've currently got many of these in the menu bar. If I take the Bluetooth one out, just as an example, it's still in Control Center. If I actually wanted Bluetooth in the menu bar for some reason, all I have to do is drag that up and put it in the menu bar. Yeah. So it lets you put them back in again if you don't want them all collapsed into the Control Center. So it gives you just a convenient way of accessing them all. Now, I'll leave that there for now. If we go into System Preferences, there's actually a whole section in here which I haven't even looked for yet. Where's it hiding? I've got some extra stuff down the bottom, so they wouldn't normally be there. Where is Control Center? Dock and menu bar to be under there. Yep. So if I go to Dock and menu bar, we've got Control Center. So here it's got sections for what you're putting in your Control Center. So you can configure which specific items are going to appear there out of all of Apple's standard ones. So far, it only supports standard Apple features, not third-party features. But there's quite a lot of, and there's actually got sections in there for what's in the menu bar. So it's got the clock. This is actually better organized than it was in previous operating systems, in my opinion, because they've got all the things that used to be in the menu bar were scattered all over the place in System Preferences, and you couldn't find them unless you knew which section they belonged in. Now they're all in one place, which is actually quite nice. So there's some definite improvements there. Dock doesn't look much different. Automatically hide and show the menu bar, yeah, that's all sensible stuff. So yeah, that's going to take some getting used to. I've only had a brief play with that so far. The other thing they've changed is there's no longer an icon on the right-hand edge to bring up the notifications and the today view. What you do now is, confusingly, you click on the time and it slides out the, when it decides to do it. Having a think about it. Here it is. Hopefully people can see that because it's a bit confusing on the screen here because I've got the Zoom thing over the top of it. Can I move that? Yeah, I'll move that out of the way, then I can see it. Okay, so that's actually bringing in a new combined today and notifications view, so it's all in one. All of your notifications are grouped together at the top. All of your widgets are down below that. And these widgets, for those who've already seen iOS 14, are the same widgets as iOS 14, so that you can actually have applications which provide you with basically view-only, dynamically updated widgets, which will run on iPhone, iPad, Mac, and the same things will work in all of them. But they only appear in the launch center, in the, what's it called?
Just a question, slightly. One of the comments made in the video was the fact that you can run iOS applications.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. I just thought of that as well. So yeah, that's a point to make a bit later. Basically, they're all new style widgets. If you had any previous widgets, all of the old widgets do not work anymore on Big Sur. You have to use new style widgets. So for example, I had a copy of PCalc, which is a calculator which gave me a nice powerful calculator in the sidebar, and that's gone. They've replaced it with one in the menu bar instead in case you still need it. So they've already done an update ready for it. The icons all look a bit different. The folder icons, if you can see that, if I can I zoom that perhaps? Is that going to show up if I zoom? No, it doesn't show up. If I just do a get info or something on it, go to my desktop and then go view that way and click on one of them. The icons have quite a different appearance overall, so all the standard folder icons and so forth have changed. The other major change is that sounds have all changed. Every single sound effect in the operating system for doing things like task completed, errors, they're all different, but I think they're all nicer. They're just, it takes a bit of getting used to. You think, what was that noise? Oh, okay. It's generally taken me about probably a couple of days to get used to certain sounds, but now that I've got used to it, I go back to the old one again. I'm now multitasking, effectively working out, okay, I'm on this system, that's what I expected to hear. I'm on the system, that's what I expected to hear. So there's quite a few little sort of changes like that. So overall, appearance, fine. It's just different. Yeah, so all that's pretty good.
What's the yellow bar?
Sorry?
There's a yellow bar on the left-hand side.
Oh, that's just I've zoomed out to show the desktop. Yeah. I was using the spread fingers on trackpad to get the desktop visible, just so I could see some of the icons there. Yep. Now, Graham raised a little point earlier, which I missed mentioning when I was talking about M1 Macs. There is a new feature that is only on M1 Macs. you can now run iPhone and iPad apps directly on a Mac. You cannot do that on an Intel Mac because what it's actually doing is it's directly executing the same code that runs on an iPhone and iPad, and to do that it needs an ARM processor. So it's got to have an Apple Silicon processor to be able to achieve that. Now, at the moment, that is what I would regard as a potentially useful but not particularly well implemented feature, I would say. It gives you the capability, but it's not something I would want to use for anything serious. It's sort of, if there is an app that's only available on the iPhone or iPad, you can now probably run it on the Mac as long as the developer decides to let you, which they can choose whether or not to. And it might give you more capabilities than you had before. Like, for example, you might be able to use the app on the computer rather than going to the website for some service, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, quite a few of the obvious ones are missing. There's no Netflix app, for example. You still have to go to the website. But some things, like I listen to podcasts using an app called Overcast. The iPad version of Overcast works reasonably well on the Mac, so I can now listen to my Mac if I want to.
Future for any developer that produces an application for the Mac using the ARM processor, which you can use on the iPad. Go the opposite way.
No.
Because you haven't got a touch bar.
It's almost impossible to go the other way. No, it's not this. Like, basically, the biggest problem with running the iPhone and iPad apps on the Mac is it doesn't have a touch screen on the Mac. So they're having to pretend how to deal with the touch interface. So it does weird things like you click and drag with the mouse or trackpad in the right place to simulate moving a finger across the screen. There's some apps even that doesn't work, and you have to put it into a special mode where you then use the arrow keys to simulate swipes in certain directions, and it's a little bit cumbersome. So it's there and it might be useful, but I think it needs some work. But the idea is that it gives app developers a chance to have their iPhone or iPad apps running on the Mac from day one. And if they get enough interest in it, it gives them an encouragement that actually there are quite a few Mac users out there who would like to have a better one. Then they can put in the extra work to convert it to run better on the Mac by making use of Mac native technologies rather than iPhone, iPad stuff. Touch screen Macs, so that's a big debate in the community. Apple has basically denied black and blue that they're going to do that. But they've done that before with other features. So basically they're denying there is no possibility of there being a Mac with a touchscreen until there is a Mac with a touchscreen, then the whole story will change. My current thinking is that it's not likely to happen anytime soon. Yeah, no, basically I think they're separating the markets. The iPad is the primary large screen device with a touchscreen. The Mac is more aimed at keyboard and trackpad use or mouse. So I think there's a crossover, particularly with the iPad with Magic Keyboard and that sort of thing. So anyway, okay, I'm going to switch back to my main computer. Here I am back again. I think we're going to stop soon. And any last questions? Because basically, next Monday night, I'm going to run another Zoom session where we can go into a bit more detail on some of the stuff, because I'll by then have had another week to play with things and got a better idea of what state things were in. No, that's going to be an online meeting only via Zoom. So people who would like to ask follow-up questions or thinking about what to buy or want to know more about Big Sur or want to know more about M1 Max and how certain things work, my plan is that basically if you have any specific questions, please email them to me so I know what people want to know, and I can add that to my list of things to try and just check out if I can access it. So if it ends up being a short meeting, that's good. That means I can have the rest of the evening off. But yeah, it'll be easier than tonight because I won't have to lug all the computer equipment with me. I'll have it all at home. So that will be more straightforward. Yep.
I have this need to transfer a video file, actually, from my Mac onto my iPad. Because the iPad is a little portable one to go and show other people.
Yeah.
And I found it very easy to transfer a video from an iPad to a Mac, almost impossible to get the other way.
You're not trying very hard then.
Well, in the end, I started searching on Google and found to actually download an application. It's just do it easily.
Nope.
Every time I tried to do it from the Mac to the iPad, it was difficult.
Normally the way you do it is you use AirDrop. If you can't use AirDrop, you use iCloud Drive, if that's unless it's too big.
I tried that too, and it wasn't very successful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about iPad 2.
Ah, okay, that would explain the problem.
Sorry.
Yes, so Graham was basically saying he was having trouble transferring stuff to an older iPad running, if it's an iPad 4 running iOS 10, it would still support AirDrop, so that should have still worked.
I turned the application to just load onto your Mac and just
Yeah, but basically if you're running a recent enough iPad, it's got the Files app on it, it directly integrates with iCloud Drive. AirDrop works nicely for transferring stuff. If it's an older model running an older operating system, it gets harder.
Big Sur comes up on the binder.
Yes. The old method of transferring stuff onto an iPad involved iTunes. You plug your iPad into the computer, you go to it in iTunes, and then there was a horrible file transfer thing which you had to pick the application and drag and drop things into a window, and that put it into a transfer area on the iPad where you then had to copy it out. That mechanism still works. It's now in Finder rather than iTunes and Big Sur or in Catalina.
Transfer 2 files.
Yeah.
I didn't want to use the syncing because syncing was going to delete the whole files and resync it all across. That's not what I want.
Yeah, well, that's a separate feature. That's if your iPad was set to sync with the computer, then when you plug it in, the computer will ask if you want to do a sync.
That's the point of bringing you up, but I thought, search on Google. I found my application doesn't.
Well, there are multiple applications that provide an alternative way of doing it, but you don't need them for recent operating systems, only for older ones.
So it's basically just an old iPad.
Yeah. Margaret, you have a hand up. Yep. You need to unmute. I can't hear you.
So I've got the fan on. Can you download the video file onto a flash drive and transfer it with the appropriate adapters? Would that work for Graham?
Not for an older iPad because it has no way to access them. With a modern one, with the Files application, you probably could because it can read files off external flash drives, but older ones have no capability of doing that.
But my question is about Super Duper. So I've got a hand up for a while there. I've got 3.3.1. I tried updating it when it suggested it, and as far as I recall, it wouldn't do it. Does it know that I'm what OS I'm running? Like
yeah, 3.3.1 I think is the current version.
Okay.
So there is no update.
All right, it must have worked then, but I'm a bit scared of blindly following it and then finding I can't.
Yeah, I think from memory, SuperDuper, the current version, works all the way back to Yosemite, so it doesn't break compatibility with recent OS versions, so that's all right.
Right, but this is a big leap now, so do you think they'll still keep to that they?
Yeah, it's just Apple keeps changing in major ways how the operating system is stored in the file system for newer operating systems. So they have to add support for new ways of copying the operating system. So the effect you get is that right now you could use, up until they released the latest update, you could use Carbon Copy Cloner to copy your entire computer, but the copy wouldn't be bootable. You could then install Big Sur on the copy and it would be bootable. So there's extra hoops to jump through. But when they added support for doing Big Sur properly, they didn't break the older operating systems. So they still work on reasonably recent older versions as well. So
what about SuperDuper, which is the one?
Well, SuperDuper, I think their problem is they're not ready for Big Sur yet. They haven't jumped through the same hoops that Carbon Copy Cloner have.
Yeah. Will I have to resist upgrading until I've got Big Sur?
Well, they're pretty good about only offering upgrades that you can. I think it's not likely they'll drop support for much older operating systems. It's really only a question of how far back can they make the new version run without causing problems, and it works out which system it's running on and behaves correctly for each system. Yeah. So right now, it's not ready for the new systems, but it still works on the old systems.
No, but just saying it recognises what the client's computer.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. That's what it seemed like, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about that.
I'll take this down.
I see Andrew's comment there about music is even worse on Big Sur. I haven't even looked at music on Big Sur. I've only looked at music on Catalina, and that was bad enough that I don't even want to look at music on Big Sur. I'm still going to run iTunes if I have to, which is a horrible hack to get iTunes onto your computer. I think I'll finish for now, for tonight. Run a bit longer than I hoped. So thank you all. And if I don't see you next week, have a good Christmas. And we shall hopefully see you in the new year.
Is it supper?
And you know where I am if you have any questions.
Is it supper time, David?
Yeah, it will be. Yep. So what we'll do is I'll probably just leave my computer running here for those who want to chat to anybody in the room. It's the easier option. I didn't bother getting the camera and microphone set up the way I wanted, but people can come around the front and talk on my computer to anybody who's still there. So we'll just leave this running in the meantime.
Thanks very much, David. Will next week's meeting be recorded, mate?
I can record that one as well, yep. So we'll make this one available once I've sorted out the details. And Graham can record that one anyway because he can do it from home, so that will be all right. Yep,
Sure.
so I don't know yet what exactly we're going to cover. It'll depend on what the questions are, basically, and what I've found out in the next week.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks a heap, everyone. Good night.
Okay, no.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Right, thank you, Reg. Now, leave the meeting. And I will stop recording now.